Okay, the majority decided English. Okay, so today we're going to talk about from theory to practice. The purpose of this presentation to close the gap when you start learn HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, the stuff which we don't learn in technical college or whatever. So you know the basics, you have the knowledge of what you can do. The question is how you start actually doing that. How do you start to write the project? You started from CSS, you started HTML, jQuery, how they all connected together. It's not very tricky, but there are some questions which worth to talk about. So that's what we're going to talk about. Why am I talking at all, and who am I? I work as a front developer at a company called ProImage in Netanya. What we do is we develop a software for publishing houses. Publishing houses, it's a place where you print newspapers, magazines, and so on and so forth. Most of our clients, they're outside of Israel. It's United States, Europe, and so on. Asia, France. I'm also co-organizer of another meetup, which is Ember.il. Ember is a JavaScript framework which we are using. So if you're interested in learning more JavaScript, you're welcome to join. It's meetup.com/ember-il. And I'm also a graduate student here. I hope to finish soon finally. Okay, so today we're going to talk about 7 things. We'll start about understanding the destiny. Understanding the destiny is we're going to talk about goals, functionality, and structure. It's I'm not going to instruct, I'm going to talk about in the first point. The second part, we're going to talk about how to organize your life, particularly how to organize the project, the files, where to put images, CSS, and stuff like that. In the third part, we're going to talk about libraries, because the serious project can't work without libraries. So the question is how to choose them. Sometimes it might be tricky, we'll talk about in the part 3. In the part 4, we're finally going to start writing code. So today, part of the code I'm going to write live. So I'm going to make bugs, mistakes, something is going to work. I'm going to forget some Nikuda 6, so let me know if I forget it. And we'll start to do that in part 4. We're going to start writing HTML, basic layout. In part 5, we're going to make it nice with CSS. Make it somehow fancy. In part 6, we're going to bring some JavaScript, particularly jQuery. And in part 7, as much as we have time, you are going to have an opportunity to write the code. That's why I asked you to bring laptops, so you can try. If you need help, I'm here to help you. Okay, so before we start, raise your hands who knows HTML and CSS. Whoa, everybody, sweet. What, seriously, everybody? Okay, who knows JavaScript and jQuery? Okay, less. Nice. Okay, who wrote some websites, web applications? Why there are many people who raised who raised hands here? There are more people here than here. Oh, maybe. Okay. Okay, who wrote some websites using JavaScript frameworks, particularly some MVC? 1, 2, okay. Sorry guys, probably this talk is not going to be very much interesting for you, but we'll see. Okay, so we'll start from understanding the destiny, particularly how do you start the project. So the project we're going to start and trying to differentiate it in goal, functionality, and structure. I made some notes for me. Okay, so define the trying to detailize the project in that way will give you the idea what kind of technologies you're going to use, what kind of database you might need, what kind of the server you're going to need, and particularly what libraries on the front end you might use. So we'll start with the goal. And it's usually very short sentence, like 1 to 2 sentences, specifying what exactly you want to do. So today we're gonna I will start to try to build, let's say, online web store which is gonna sell fruits and vegetables. Okay, so for this purpose I want to build, create a user-friendly web store for selling fruits and vegetables. Okay, very simple. Then I want to decide what my store actually want to do. So let's say I want to make a login screen for a user. I don't know why. I want that every user is gonna have their own profile. Display a list of available items with prices. Display detailed information per item, per fruit and vegetable. Then I want to be able to add items to the basket. So I'll have something like a basket where you can put all your stuff, and then I'm going to calculate the sum, and then I'm going to send an order. Okay? So now after describing all that, you see how your project, your idea is going to detailize. And now it's time to do some modeling. For the simple project, it's very simple models, like rectangles on a paper and pen, napkin, whatever, or in some diagram. For the large projects, who knows what UML is? Okay, good. You can use UML. It surprisingly helps, despite how much annoying it is sometimes. For this simple project, let's say as an example, I want to have a login screen which is somewhere on the side. I have two main views, which are thumbnail view and the table view. We have a basket which should be somehow connected because I can add items as from this view and from that view. And if I click on the item, they can both show a description view. Okay. So now when we know what we can build and what we want to build, let's talk how to organize your files. When you start and from the very basic point of view, it's not actually a problem because you can, no. When you think of it, it's not a problem. When you start actually trying to organize a big project, it might become a problem. Why? Because paths of files which you load, they are resolved by names. Okay, so if you set a certain structure and then you're gonna rename a folder or move certain files from another folder to another folder or make a mess, so it's gonna influence to your application. When you have 3 folders, it's easy to fix. When you have this is more complex, like, I don't know, 7 folders. In my current project, I have like 10 folders, and then they are nested. And if I start messing with that project, that's going to be a disaster. So from the very beginning, I need to think in advance how much complex my project is going to be, and I have to choose the file structure which fits not my current needs, but my future needs. So the trick is to choose the aspect, let's say like that, by which you want to make a division. So the simplest one is by type. Let's say I'm going to create, you don't see anything, right? You see what's written here?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to say it. So you can divide it by types, and the simplest is I'm going to create a separate folder for CSS, separate folder for images, separate folder for my JavaScript. Inside JavaScript, I'm going to make a folder for libs where I'm going to store all my third-party libraries. And on the top level, I'm going to have index.html. That's the very basic. I think in W3C also they mentioned this structure. You can make it a little bit more complex and to the CSS images in JavaScript and libs. Inside JavaScript, you can add the separation of concerns, it's called, where you're going to specify your MVC structure. Yes.
Isn't there any frameworks that allow you to do refactoring to the
refactoring of the project structure?
Yeah.
Not that I know of. Maybe. Actually, I've never asked this question. There might be, I've never checked. What the separate project might be no, but for example, if you use some powerful IDEs, they can, when you try to rename, when you try to move, they check all the reference whether this file with a certain name appears, and they're trying to help you to help with that mess. The WebStorm ID, for example, the best ID for web development. That does for you, but it's still not problematic. It's not really pleasant, not very pleasant process to go through. So it's better to set it from the very beginning right, and then just to make little changes. So coming back to separation of concerns, so in JavaScript you can separate, instead of putting all your JavaScript in one folder, you can create controllers, models, templates, and views, and put everything there. So for the complex projects, you're gonna need another structure. Complex projects, I mean those projects where you're gonna use a build system for JavaScript files. It sounds weird, but yes, you can make a build for JavaScript files to take all your source codes, concatenate them together, uglify them so that nobody besides browser can read your code. Okay, so you're gonna have assets. Assets is something static. We're gonna put your CSS, images, and stuff like that. Then you're gonna have your folder build, which is from the very beginning empty because the building process is gonna put the compiled code there. Then you have a folder called CRS, which is short form source, where you're gonna put all your code in the very might be similar structure. Then you're gonna have probably a folder for unit tests called tests. And vendors is usually a library where you put this is a folder where you put your libraries. Okay. Questions? Okay. So I'm gonna talk about several projects which are very worth to mention. The first of them is HTML5 Boilerplate. This is a project of Paul Irish. Paul Irish is the guy who works as an advocate developer in Google now in California. So he wrote some websites, and he was he had some problems with memories, as he said. And he said, like, I don't remember all the good techniques that I decided for myself, which I want to use. So I created a project where I store that, for example, the template for HTML5 pages, that template is the best. Or these templates for JavaScript files, this is the file structure of the project that I want. And this project, so he made this project on GitHub, published it, and it became insanely popular. So now they created a website you can just go download. It's basically an empty, not an empty, it's like a template for your project, including libraries. It has already Jquery, it has already Modernizer, it has templates for HTML, for CSS, for JavaScript. There are many stuff there. Okay, that's what I mentioned, and you can check it out on html5boilerplate.com. Okay. Now we're going to talk about how to choose a comrades. Well, the serious project absolutely can't work without libraries. At least Jquery you're going to use, or something similar. The problem is how to choose those libraries. And here's a small checklist which I would recommend. That's usually the way I check if I have some problems. But who knows what GitHub is? Majority. Thanks, God. Stack Overflow. Sweet. Okay. So for those who didn't raise the hand, GitHub is a place. It is online-based repositories of code where you commit your code, you clone it, and that's a tool which teams use to distributedly develop the code. So I take the clone to my local machine, I do some changes, I do commit to the repository, and it checks whether I have conflicts, whether I ruin somebody's code or somebody is messing with my code, so stuff like that. Stack Overflow is basically forum for geeks. Yes. Question.
Does GitHub work for closed source or only for open source?
if you GitHub has a paid subscription, so if you're ready to pay it like $200, feel free. It's gonna be close to you. But for all the rest who are greedy and doesn't want to pay, it's open source. So for free, yes, it must be open source. There is a source, also repository called Bitbucket. Bitbucket allows you to give to set private repositories. Okay, so when you have set of libraries you want to choose and you have no clue, like they are equally good, you don't know which one. So that's things which you might check. You go to GitHub to the page of the source code on GitHub, 98% that it's going to be there. You take a look at the amount of watchers. It's a sign on the top right corner. Watchers means how many people said +1 that they want to get notification on updates of this project. Means basically the amount of people who are interested in that project, how much it's popular. And that amount should be big. The bigger the amount, the better. Forks. Fork is when I come to somebody's project and I'm interested in, I want to fork it to my repository and mess with that. I want to improve it, I want to not improve it, whatever. Okay? So people do forks. About forks, it's either people try to improve it because they are not very satisfied, but they take a repository as a code base, which might be the option. In this case, the repository might have many forks, and you don't want to do that. If it has small amount of forks, I can say anything. So let's say the amount of forks you want to have somewhere medium. Okay. The third part is issues. Issues on GitHub is a place where you have bugs, improvements, or whatever suggestions. You go and publish it there. Usually, issues are used for bugs. Something doesn't work, I go and post, I create the issue. So the amount of issues should be more or less small. But if you want to be more detailed, so you go to issues. There is a label called bug, and you see how many bugs they have. So, and that amount should be small, of course. Okay, that's part of the GitHub. Now we go to Stack Overflow. Stack Overflow is basically a forum where people ask some weird questions, difficult questions, and usually developers they sit there. There are hashtags, so they monitor, they answer the questions. So the result of let's say I'm interested in Jquery, so if I go to Stack Overflow and write Jquery, I get the huge list of results, and that means it's good. If you have a small list of results, it means something is not good. Not so many people are interested, not so many people are posting questions, and it doesn't necessarily says that the library is bad. It means that if you get a problem, the probability that you're gonna get some help is very, very small. And you also check the votes. The votes are given to the answers when people decide that the answer for the certain question is good, so they give votes. The more votes, the better. Okay, that's it. Based on these criteria, you can...
Also Google Trends.
Google?
Trends.
Google Trends works for the libraries?
Yeah, for every search term.
Okay, that might be...
See what's more popular.
Yeah, I agree. Yes. Okay. Let's talk more about libraries that you might choose. I divided libraries into 3 parts. One of the type of the libraries which you're probably gonna need is DOM manipulation library. Why you need a DOM manipulation library? Okay, who knows what DOM manipulation library is? Okay, okay. Jquery, everybody knows. So Jquery almost equals DOM manipulation library. DOM manipulation library, which does basically all the manipulations with HTML from JavaScript. That's what it does. Why we need it? Because the way there are 2 things. There is document object model inside the browser and browser object model. Browser object model is basically API for browser, which you call from time to time. And these are things which are not specified. So theoretically, browser can implement, or companies who make browsers, they can implement it whatever they like. Okay. Now Chrome is almost monopolist. Okay, on the browser, and the core of Chrome is WebKit. It's used by Safari. It's used by Opera now. So what we have left is WebKit, Mozilla, and Internet Explorer. Always the pain is with Internet Explorer. So what DOM manipulation library do? They build an abstraction layer over the DOM, such that you call an API of that library, and they make sure that it's gonna work in all the browsers. You don't need to write the separate code. This part of the code is gonna work for, let's say, Internet Explorer. For Chrome, I'm gonna write another code. Sometimes you don't even pay attention to that. I had to build it from internationalization library, the thing which is gonna just switch the languages. When you switch language, I need to refresh the UI. And so the way I need to decide, I need to identify which language of the browser. So I go navigator, which is basically a browser navigator .language. Okay, very simple. I get English, for example, and it works in Chrome, and it works in I believe in Mozilla and Python. My colleague goes, opens the Internet Explorer, and it doesn't work. Like, shit. Sorry, why it doesn't work? I don't know why. So I said, then I opened the console, because Internet Explorer doesn't have a method of navigator language. Internet Explorer has a method navigator.userLanguage. And these tiny things which annoys you, which ruins your code, DOM manipulation libraries, they take care of that. So the most famous DOM manipulation library is Jquery. Now they released Jquery 2.0, which doesn't support Internet Explorer. It supports only Internet Explorer from 9 and above. So they said the Internet Explorer 6, 7, and 8, we don't want you. But Jquery also said we're gonna support version 1.9, which still supports all the Internet Explorer stuff. Besides that, there is also a small library, but with almost the same API, you can just switch them, and 90% everything is going to work, which is called Zapto. The old DOM manipulation library, but I think it's still alive, but it's even more older than jQuery. It's called MuTools. So this is the most important part of this slide, actually. Save yourself a time. Don't try to write the DOM manipulation library for yourself. For education purposes, awesome. For the production, no, because there are not many people, but there are sometimes people who said, my project is not big, I'm gonna write it my own. No, believe me, you're gonna save yourself time, nervous, and you're gonna be way more productive if you just take a jQuery, it's not really big, and use it. Okay, the second part of the libraries, comrades, which you might need, I called it UI and widgets. Complex applications from time to time. Complex applications always need widgets and widget libraries. Simple applications from time to time. So let's start with UI. UI libraries or UI frameworks. It's basically a huge list of CSS with class names. So when you write your HTML as a class, you put the class name of the UI library, and it's gonna make it somehow nice. Okay, the very primitive example of that is Twitter Bootstrap. Who knows what Twitter Bootstrap is? Nice. Okay, that's a very sweet thing, very popular and getting more and more popular. So this is a very basic UI library. It also has some widgets, which are additional JavaScript components. So widgets is you make an instance of the JavaScript object, you say where it should, you give it a selector where it should sit in the DOM, and it automatically generates some HTML for you sometimes. usually. Okay. So what are type of the widgets you might need, you might meet? Splitters. Splitter is when you divide your when you divide your screen in several parts, like that, and then you drag someone and it moves. That's called splitter. Trees. Accordion. Accordion usually is used on mobiles. What's the? Everybody knows what's accordion, or it's better to give it an example. I think people who have iPhones, I think that might be used there. So basically, accordion is I have a list, and when I click, it expands. Okay, so I have some data here, and here is the list. I click here, so this like whoop, closes, and that one expands. So that's called accordion. Context menu. Context menu is a widget when you make a right click and you want, instead of browser context menu, have your question. No? Okay. Drop down, charts, calendar, grids. Grids is another table, another name just for the table. But if it's very fancy table, it's called grid. Dialogues. Dialogues is just a pop-up which you open with the close button, OK, save, or something like that. So, who might that be? So, the simplest and the most popular, as I said, is Twitter Bootstrap. More complicated and good. Jquery UI, the second popular library. I personally use Kendo UI. Very nice. I would recommend it. It has many components. Not very much complex. It gives you ability to write extensions. Very nice. Widget components. What's nice about widget components is if you need to write an application which deals both with mobile and the browser, because what they do is they automatically identify, because the events in the browser and the way you write an application might be slightly different. So what's good in Widget is they automatically identify from which device you come, and they know which type of library to ship you. That's very sweet. jQuery widgets and Dojo. Okay. The last part of libraries, or comrades, which I would like to talk is JavaScript frameworks. Why do we need JavaScript frameworks at all? Because when you start writing JavaScript, the more and more JavaScript you write, the more mess it comes. Because you have function here, you might have function there, you have a callback, and then it becomes a spaghetti code. It becomes a mess. It's almost impossible to manage that, because you have some objects there, some object here, definition here, instantiation there. Balagan. So what the JavaScript frameworks give you, first they try to organize the code for you. And they also give you a clean separation of concerns, which is in other words called MVC, Model View Control. Who knows what MVC is? Cool. Everybody does. Okay, so MVC is Model View Control, and most of the libraries, they ship that architectural pattern. What are the frameworks? My favorite, of course, is the first. It's going to be Ember.js, the sweetest theme. It's produced by guys who worked in Apple, then they left. The Ember.js, its roots goes to Sprout Core, which was used in iCloud and some other mobile application which Apple built. Backbone is very basic, I wouldn't say primitive, but very nice and basic framework which was born in New York Times by JavaScript developers there. Angular.js, the framework, probably the most popular now, is the framework which was born in Google. Also very nice, and many more. It's like, I don't know, a lot. So how you can choose the JavaScript frameworks besides the checklist. I'm not sure that the checklist is going to help you much here. For example, to choose Ember.js for our application took me half a year, honestly. Half a year I was struggling to choose a framework. The best way I would recommend to choose a framework is choose a list, choose the frameworks which you think you might be interested in, and try to write some applications. Not just some applications. Try to write applications which fit your needs, which express the features that you want. For example, the way I chose Ember, I wrote 4 performance tests, because we have huge tables with thousands of records and I need to update them almost live. So I need a framework which allows me to do that without any sluggish movements and make it fast. And Ember was the most complex out of all of them, and I didn't want to choose Ember at all. It was so much complex and not cool. But it overperformed every other framework. It was so impressive. So I said, no matter how complex it is, we're gonna take it. It's super cool, and now I love it. Okay, so that's the way I would recommend you to choose the framework. Another project which I can recommend is to do MVC project. Is the guy who also works in Google. His name is Adi Osmani. He works in London. He also struggled a lot in order to choose JavaScript frameworks. So what he did, he created a GitHub repository again, where starting using different frameworks, they said let's try to do application in each of them. So if you go to the link, okay. So here's a list of JavaScript frameworks which they used in order to write it, and they continue, so it keeps growing. And it's not just some stupid implementation, because usually like Adi starts that, and then people who develop the framework, they come and they fix the code the way that it's going to be efficient, the way it's supposed to be. That was the case with Ember. So as you see, there is Backbone, Angular, Ember, Knockout, Dojo, YUI, long list. Okay, so that might be a helpful resource. So to go and check it out. So it's todomvc.com. Very simple. Okay, layout. I believe here we're gonna start writing some code. So I'm gonna sit. Can I sit?
Yeah.
Okay. So now we're gonna write some code. Or we can do Osaka, because it's 7:30. You tired? Because that's a good time to do Osaka.
הפיצה אמורה להגיע עוד 10 דקות, אני מקווה שאתם...
אז? אוקיי, אז בואו...
אפשר להתחיל.
כן. אז בואו... Okay. What I want to do... Okay, no הפסקה. Wait till 10 more minutes, wait. We're gonna do some very basic stuff. So, I'm gonna start and create the project. Where is it? Delete here, no? Let's delete here. Okay. So what we start with is we're gonna create this project and to create a very basic CSS, JavaScript, libs and images folder, and template for HTML and CSS and JavaScript. So here I have a project. The folder done is for me if I'm gonna screw up with the code, because there the code is done. And I'm gonna be brave and I'm gonna start typing live. So I'm gonna create a folder where I'm gonna store all my projects. So as we said, we're gonna create a very basic structure. So what we're gonna need is a CSS folder, folder for JavaScript, folder for images. We're gonna call it image. And also in JavaScript, we need a folder called libs, where we're going to store our libraries. Okay, that's about it for folders. Now we're going to create a template for HTML, and we're going to call it index.html. Usually the main web store. This is a super thing, but it costs money. Sorry. It costs $50, but it's worth it. Every dollar. Okay, so we create index.html file. We create inside CSS. I'm gonna create let's call it up CSS file. We're gonna keep my style sheets. In JavaScript, I'm gonna keep my JavaScript file. I'm gonna also call it up.js. And in libs, we're gonna store Jquery. So for that purpose, let's go to Jquery. Jquery.com. I never write it correctly. Jquery.com. Jquery.com. Okay, here's the download file, and here is the version that I talked to you. There is 1.9, which is also an official version which deals with Internet Explorer, and version 2.mashu. Okay, so we're gonna choose the 2 compressed. We're gonna open it. It's gonna open it, and we're gonna save. Haifa save. What happened?
File save.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Okay, let's sort in downloads. Seriously? It's unbelievable. Okay, so where's my pointer? Huh?
Stone. Stone. כולל? כן.
So what I'm doing right now on my Finder here, on my I'm gonna copy libs to Jquery to libs. That's what I'm trying to do. So if I go to WebStorm, what, you're struggling? What's the name of the IDEs? Where's the mouse? No? That's the name of the IDE. If you still didn't figure out, it's called WebStorm, of the company called JetBrains. It costs $50. As I said, it's super awesome. It's worth it. Okay. So now inside of libs, I have my jQuery, and we're basically done. So what we start with HTML, and let's give a title for our site. I'm gonna call it fruit cell. Okay. First of all, I need to connect my style sheets, because you can't load it to render HTML file unless all the style sheets are loaded, parsed. So that's the very first thing that you want. So from the very beginning, I'm gonna ask my style sheets, and I'm gonna give it a path. It's gonna be my CSS up CSS. Okay.
The quotes.
Huh?
Okay, the quotes.
Yeah.
CSS.
Oh, you see, I told you I'm gonna make some bugs, I'm gonna make mistakes because I already wrote code live. It's very nerve-wracking. If you think that it's easy, it's not. You do many mistakes, you do many stupid bugs which you would never do at home. But that's the price. Okay. So who studied through W3 schools or whatever? Usually it's said that you put scripts here after the links in the head. Well, no. Put them better before you closing the body. That's better. Why it's better? Because browser is not going to parse your HTML before. It's not going to parse your HTML until it loads everything that it has in the head. Okay? So it's going to load style sheets, then it's going to load JavaScript. And if you have some execution in JavaScript, it's going to execute JavaScript. And you're not going to see anything on the screen until your JavaScript is finished. When your JavaScript is finished, it will go to HTML stuff which is inside the body. Okay, so it's not user-friendly at all. So what I would recommend you to do is to write your HTML in body and and load your scripts at the very end. Put them. So when your page is loading, while it's loading, at least user will see some. It's gonna be static. It's not gonna. If user is gonna try to click, nothing is gonna work because JavaScript is still not loaded. But at least user is gonna see something, and that's better already. Okay, so I'm gonna first load my Jquery. Jquery, and give it a path. It's JS libs. No, it's not dot. JS /libs/ Jquery. Okay, and after I loaded the Jquery, I can load my JavaScript file. So it's script source equals to JavaScript /app.
Not slash.
GS, not slash. Okay. That's it. That's the very basic example from which we're gonna start and continue write code. Osaka. So let's continue. Okay, everybody's happy, everybody's full. Good. We started from HTML. We created a very basic project structure with HTML, index HTML, CSS, images, JavaScript. So, and we wrote the very basic template for HTML. Okay, so now we done. We have knowledge of JavaScript and CSS. So finally, it's time to start. Where do you start from? Ideas?
HTML. The content.
What's the question?
Huh? You have HTML template and your basic project structure. How do you start? And you want to write a website. How do you start? Where do you start from? There was an option to start with HTML. Okay.
By
good.
domain, etc.
No, I'm not. I'm talking about development. I don't care about
Layout. Think about the layout. How
okay.
it will look.
Good. Any other answers? What?
Wireframe.
Wireframe, which is okay. Also layout, basically. Okay. Logics.
Server side.
Because you're a server guy, right? That's why you go into the server. Yeah, I know these people also. They're also cool. No harsh feelings. So yeah, you're gonna start with layout. Why? Because this is the very basic static stuff that you have. When you write your first layout, you know what parts are going to work. And then, because we're writing if you still didn't get it, we write in single page application. What does it mean? We're not going to bring pages and pages here and there. We're going to make a div in which we're going to inject our data. Okay? That's a single page application. I don't want to refresh all this stuff. Why we're writing a single page application, that's another question. See the lecture number 1. So we're gonna start from layout, that's true, and we're gonna start from writing HTML. So these diagrams basically describes the iterative approach how you will start to write the code. Doesn't matter whether it's layout, whether it's a particular component, a navigation bar, it's a thumbnail view, or whatever it is. So you start with the HTML. You start with the static data. You can write something that you can refresh the page and you see something, which is already good. What you see, usually ugly. So you want to make it nice, so you go to CSS. You tweak it with CSS, you make it nice. But it's still static. Then you go to JavaScript, and you add, with the Jquery, you add some event handlers, clicks, some logic, front-end logic, with JavaScript, and then it's going to work. Okay, so you build layout, then you move to components. You build navigation bar, you made it nice, you made it clickable. You go to footer. Footer has nothing to do. You just make it HTML, just make it CSS, make it nice. Then you go to table view. You created a table, it's ugly, it's small. Then you go to CSS, you make it big. You make it colorful. Then you make JavaScript files so you can click, you can do something with that table. And so on and so forth. That's the cycle. So let's talk about layout. Here's this example about layout. First, we're going to talk about HTML stuff of layout, then we're going to talk about CSS part of the layout. The HTML part is boring, so since everybody knows HTML, I'm going to just not skip it, but I'm going to run it through. So the very basic layout looks like that. Okay? You have header. Here's the place where you're going to inject all your data, all your visual whatever stuff you want, and footer. The very basic HTML for that is you have a header, you have some div with ID main, for example, so you can identify your div where you're going to put the data, and you have a footer. Here's a link in the presentation to JS Beans, where you can see the code, you can see the CSS, and you see actually the layout itself. Another type of layout is like 3 columns. It's quite popular in news websites. Here they put some banners, some bullshit stuff. Nobody will take a look. Here they put some navigation list and so on, and here they put the articles. So it's very simple. You put 3 divs, that's it. But then you have to tweak it with CSS, because if you just put 3 divs with CSS, yeah, exactly, it's going to be as it was before, like that, but not like that. Okay. And the third layout, which I'm going to present today, the hardest. It has header and footer, here and here, and container, which contains these 2 divs, and inside it have 2 divs, one is on the left, one is on the right. Again, if you write a simple plain JavaScript, it's not going to look like that, you need to tweak it with CSS. Okay, so let's go and make our makeup. Makeup. No, I don't want to do makeup. What I want to do is to create my basic layout, just to write some code. Okay, so let's say I want to have a header. I want to have a footer.
Outside of the header.
I want to have a footer. It didn't work. And I want to make div with a d main. Okay. The very first basic layout that I showed you. I'm gonna save and go back to our presentation. Okay. Now we're gonna talk about CSS. CSS is super awesome. Boom. No, seriously, you can't believe how many stuff you can do with that. Now it became so much popular with CSS 3. You can do gradients, you can do animation, the thing which you used to do with the Jquery. You can do shadows, the thing which you used to do with images. You create a separate image for shadow. It's unbelievable. It's ridiculous. Nobody does that anymore. It has round corners. If somebody started to program in like to work in HTML. There was a time when you had to write to make round corners with a separate image. You make a triangle and you make it curved, and that's the place where you put the image. That's the way it used to be. Now it's not that. Now it's super cool. So knowing CSS is the key to success. Who knows CSS selectors? Because that's the basic which we're going to start with. You sure that you know CSS? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people. That's it? Okay, probably okay. Now we're going to look how many CSS selectors you know.
Yeah.
What is a CSS selector? I wrote it down because it's complex. In CSS, pattern matching rules determine which style rules apply to element for the HTML. These patterns, called selectors, may range from simple element names to rich contextual patterns. If all conditions in the pattern are true for a certain element, the selector matches the element. Clear? It's clear to only one person? Nice. Okay. So we'll start from very simple selectors. Why I want to talk about the selectors? Because Jquery used them. They took the very same approach, enriched it, because you use the same selectors to query DOM, to query HTML page. So if you know it in CSS, you can use it for two purposes. It's super cool. So if you write star, kochavit, I know this word, matches all the elements on the HTML page, each of them. Why would you need it? I have no clue. Then you're gonna write just element, just name of the tag. It matches any element. For example, if I write A, which are anchors, which are basically links, and set some settings for A, it's gonna apply for all the links on my page. You can write E and F, which means one element and another element. And it's gonna, for example, I want to apply certain rules to A inside the div. So it's gonna search for all the A's inside the div and apply the rule. You can write E bigger than F, which is gonna apply only for children in div. So it's not gonna be nested. Only it's gonna apply only if A is a children of div. Got it? Sure?
תסביר מה זה children בתוך הדיב.
Seriously?
רק לוודא שאני...
Okay, let's say we have div. We have div here. So children, all the tags which are inside the div. So let's say I have here A. And here I have another div. And you close another div. And inside of the div I have some span. And some other stuff, and another A, and I close the span. So when I say children of div, it means A and div. These are the children. When I'm gonna apply the 1 to 3rd rule, it's gonna go all the depth. It's gonna apply for this A and that A. When I do it with E bigger than F, it's going to apply only for this A. Only when A is a children of div.
So what is the first child?
What is the first child? Wait, it's not a selector what I'm going to talk about, okay? The first child here, particularly, is A. That's the first child.
Right.
Yeah, that's it.
So what's the difference?
The difference. And what if I say here, I want make span,
Okay.
and I want to apply something for A, which is a child of div, but it's not going to be the first child. If I'm going to write div first child, it's going to retrieve me span. It's not going to retrieve me A.
Okay.
We're going to see more in code. I hope we have enough time, and I'll try to implement most of that. Okay, so then you're going to, some properties for links, visited, active hover focus. I'm not gonna stop on that. You can also use a plus. Who knew that you can use a plus in the selectors? For those people who raised the hands that they know selectors. Who knew that they have plus? Nobody, exactly. I also didn't know that before this presentation. So, plus choose siblings. Okay. Then another type of the selectors using the attributes. So let's say E rectangular brackets. Foo is, for example, let's say I want to choose div. All divs that have an attribute, no matter what the value is, which have an attribute data dash ID, and it's going to return me all the divs. Then I can do that by specifying the value of the attribute, and I'm gonna, let's say I want to find all the inputs that have type text. It's gonna give me that. The last two are very basic, which everybody must know. It's div nikuda navigation is by class. When you specify a class, in an HTML tag element, and div hash some name. It's gonna give you element by ID. The trick is that here you can get an array. Here you get only one element always. Okay. Another important model, another important aspect of CSS is the box model. Who knows what the box model is? Woo! 1, 2. No, don't be shy, people. 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Box model is crazily important, so we're gonna stop here and talk about it. I also wrote some CSS box model describes the rectangular boxes that are generated for the element in the HTML and laid out according to the visual formatting model. Clear? I'm pretty sure that not. So how it happens in HTML? When you make a tag in HTML, it's gonna render as a box. This box has some surroundings, somewhere here. Okay. This box has a content, which is here. It has some properties, this space area inside, between borders and the content, and it has a content itself. That's the way all the HTML elements are rendered on the screen. And it's called box model. Yeah, so you can tweak it using CSS. So box model consists of several notions. So the first one is margin. The margin is the area from the border to the surroundings, okay, to the end of the screen, if it's on top of the page, or to the closest elements. The second notion is border. Margin is invisible, by the way. What you can specify is only the % or the pixel. That's it. It's basically the distance from your element to the other elements. Border is visible. You can also specify its width. If you say 0, it's going to be invisible. Padding. Padding is the space area between your content itself and the border. Okay. So if I see that my text, for example, is very close to the other element, so either I specify a margin or I specify a padding. And we have content. Yes.
When I change the box, where is it anchored to? The top left or whatever?
It usually the dimensions on HTML page goes like that. It goes. This is called left. This is called top. And this is the 0. So the population goes like that. Usually, unless you specify otherwise. Okay. So we have margin, border, padding, and the content. Margin can be tweaked from 4 sides. So you can specify margin left, margin right, margin bottom, margin top. The same, you can specify the border. You can specify a border width top. You have a certain, here it's going to be thick, here it's going to be thin. The same you do for padding. Only the content has width and height, that's it. The trick is that if you think that, let's say, your element needs to have a width, I don't know, 600. I made an example here. Let's see an example. I made some. Okay. So let's say I have a content with the width 30 pixels. It also has padding, so it's 7 pixels here, 7 pixels here. I have a border with width 3 pixels, so it's 3 pixels on the right, 3 pixels on the left, plus margin. If you do all calculations, the real width of your element is going to be 60 pixels. Okay, that's the very important meaning of knowing what the box model is. Just like what margin is, what's padding, and how they influence to the size of what you actually see on the screen.
Are we bound by a minimal margin?
Are you bound by minimal margin? No, you're not. Besides that, you can make margin negative.
Okay.
That's very interesting. How it works exactly, we'll talk it offline.
Okay.
Okay, do you have questions on the box model? No? All clear?
Can you say a few words regarding how the HTML engine like parses the layout of the page and the browser?
Oh.
Does it mean?
I can say a few words, but usually it's not a few words. There was an Israeli girl whose name was Tal. She wrote a huge article about how the browser works. Very interesting article. She explains it there. Let's leave it offline because we're limited on time. Browser does lots of work, and before that, the problem is that it's a process. Okay, it's long.
Is there like a specific order or like a priority?
Specific order of what?
Of like layout, the layout of the elements on the page.
The HTML browser represents the page of HTML as a tree. So it renders it as a tree. So in tree, of course, you have other. So you go from the top and I have no clue what algorithm it uses in order to parse that tree. But they are parsed according to the data structure. And yes, there is an order. Answer the question? Okay, so few more important aspects of CSS. The first one is display, properties of CSS. Display, which specifies how you're gonna display your element. It might be none. If it's none, you don't gonna see it. Whether it's block, whether it's inline table, or something like that. About positioning is so this is a default positioning. So you can say it might be relative to and give it the coordinates which are top and left. Relative to the surrounding elements. It might be fixed, and you give the coordinates top and left, and it's going to be there all the time no matter what. And also you're going to specify the float. Float basically says something like that. So if I have float on the divs, it means that this div is going to float here. Okay, so if I say float left, it might make them like a roll. Okay. Display inline does very similar
Float
stuff.
right is just the opposite way, like
What's the opposite way?
left or right. So float
Yeah,
right.
that's supposed to be. Okay, so here's the CSS, which is going to actually make our layout, which you showed before, which I showed only with HTML. I said that it's not going to work with CSS, and that's true. Let's take some complicated example. So these are examples of HTML and corresponding CSS, which is going to implement the layout that we talked. What's interesting here? Let's take the toughest example, and there is a link. Close! I don't want you. Oh, you dumb. Where do you want to go? You want to go there. Okay, let's go to JSBean. Login me, please. So for those who don't know what's JSBean, it's a very nice theme which gives you HTML, CSS, and JavaScript at the same place. And when you choose and when you change, so it gives you HTML, CSS, and JavaScript if you need it, and output. And if you change something in HTML, it changes the output automatically. It's very nice for some rapid prototyping. Okay. So in order to prove you that nothing is going to work with CSS without CSS, let's say I'm going to select it and delete it. Boom! You don't see anything. Why? Because what you can see here is only empty header, empty div, empty footer, empty divs with no size. The size of them is 0, 0 with no content. You don't see anything. Without CSS, it's not going to work. If I make it with CSS, now it's nice. Okay, so what do I do? What do I can specify in header, footer, and container? Okay, so in header and footer, so I write Css Selector, and it's gonna give this and that. I'm gonna apply background color. I say gray, border 1 pixel, width solid. It's solid. I don't know. There is solid. There is dashed. There is dot dashed. That's the meaning. And the color of gray. Border radius 7 pixels. So you see, you have already border radius, so I can make it rectangular, curved, and height. So I say that the height of this guy and the height of this guy is going to be 50 pixels. I also specify the margins of the container in order to make space here and there. I specified the div the container, it's 200 pixels, and I specified the left and the right div. So I say width and height you can specify in pixels, which is accurate, or you can specify it with percents according to the relative to the width of your screen. So let's say the left part I want to be 28% and 2% for the space here. So that means automatically that this part is going to be 70%. Also background color gray, the same properties, margin right 2 pixels, and float left. So what's the float left means that if I have some divs here, okay, next to that, so float them to the left relative to that div. So I also do for the right, I say width 70, background color gray, border radius, margin, and I do the margin for that. Because if I don't do the margin, it's going to be like that. They're going to be together. Okay, so let's go back to our presentation. I think it's going to be okay. That's it. It's time to write some code. Yes. כן, JSBean.
אתה יושב על הרשת והוא מסנכרן את הקבצים שיש לך בפייל?
לא, הוא לא מסנכרן את הקבצים. בראוזר לא נותן לך גישה לפייל סיסטם, זה אי אפשר. זה אי אפשרי מבחינת הסקיוריטי. לא, הקבצים האלה שיושבים שם, הם יושבים ברשת, וכאילו מה שאתה יכול לעשות מקסימום זה לעשות copy-paste לקבצים שלך. אבל כל קוד, יש קוד ב-HTML, יש קוד ב-CSS, והוא הכל ברשת שלך.
אז מה היתרון של זה בעצם על מה שיש לך בכרום?
היתרון שאתה לא צריך, יש הכל במסך אחד.
לא בכרום, אתה עושה קונטרול, קופף 12, אומר לך למטה את ה...
זה קונסול פנל. זה...
ובצד אומר לך את ה-CSS.
כן, אבל זה כבר לדיבאגינג, זה משהו אחר, זה לא לפרוטוטייפינג. אתה יכול לשנות שם, אתה יכול לעשות שם שינויים בקוד על הקוד שכבר קיים. אתה משנה את הקוד והוא מעדכן מה שיש במסך, אוקיי? אבל אם אתה רוצה לכתוב מסקרץ' מאפס, אתה לא יכול לפתוח קונסול ופתאום... בעצם לא, אתה יכול, זה פשוט לא נוח. אוקיי? ב-JSBin זה נוח, חוץ מזה אתה יכול לעשות sharing. אין שם שום בעיה, אתה גם יכול לעשות כאלה מיילסטונס, תשאיר לי גרסה הזאת, אז עכשיו אני משנה את הגרסה, אז אני אעשה שם מחלוק בקוד, אז בוא אני חוזר לגרסה הזאת. Okay, so 20, 30. So what I wanted to do, let's decide. I wanted to write some code, okay, to show you how to write a navigation bar with CSS and make it nice. We can skip it because it's already 8:30. Okay, I think we have time till 9. That's it, right? Okay. Almost. So let's say we're gonna skip all the sweet parts of HTML and CSS and make it with the gradient and make it nice. So what I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna copy paste the code which I wrote, and maybe we'll go through it very fast and see how it works. What I want here. Okay, let's have a look. Okay, so here's the code which I wanted to show you. Let's go to WebStorm and go just run through HTML. So in order to make a header, okay, what I wanted to do in a header is a navigation bar. I want to say that on the top left I'm going to have the name of the application and thumbnail, view, list view, and the basket, so you can navigate over there. So the simplest HTML, how you can do that, have any ideas without taking note on that? Wait, what? With what HTML tag you can do that? To do a navigation bar.
In HTML5 you have
List
now.
of items.
Exactly, list of items. It's unordered list. But if you make it without CSS, what you gonna have? What? Nav? header ו-nav. אם יש לך קלאס לזה בתוך בוטסטראפ, כן זה יעבוד. אם אין לך קלאס בזה בבוטסטראפ, זה לא יכול. So if you have a list without any CSS, you're gonna have bullets, and here's your text. Okay, but that's not what I want. What I want is I want to have here my app name, and here I want to have my navigations. And these you can do with CSS, with usual, absolutely usual ordered list, unordered list. That's the beauty of CSS. So here I create unordered list with list items. The first one is not link, is just the name of the application. All the rest are links, anchors in which you can click, and they're going to change the URL. So if I go to CSS,
Display inline.
Okay, so let's go CSS like that. We'll start from this part, from header ULLI. Header ULLI means that it's going to apply these rules for each LI element. First of all, when I want to get rid of the bullets, so there is a property for that which is called list style type none. It's going to remove all the bullets or whatever sign there is here. And it's going to remove that. And if I say display inline, it's going to display me inline. That's it, very simple. Then what I do, if I display it as a line, it's not enough space between the items. So in padding left and right, I increase the space between them, and I change the font size. That's it. Then inside of li element, I know that I have an anchor. So I go and check the color, and I remove the underlined. Then for li, for the first element of li, I know that it's element miuchad, and it's going to be my app name. So I want to make it big. So I say font size is going to be 26 pixels. I want to move it apart from others even more. So I'm going to specify margin right 35 pixels. And for event, I want to make it bold.
Sergey, question?
Okay.
What tool would you recommend to use in order to assess the pixel size for different components? Eyes. That's
eyes. No. If you open Chrome, and we have DevTools in Chrome. Okay. I know that guy knows what the DevTools is. Who knows else what is the DevTools inside Chrome? Yeah, the second brave guy, the third brave guy. You don't
No.
So the Chrome DevTools question. No? The Chrome DevTools allows you to debug your HTML, CSS, JavaScript, whatever there is. Profile the performance of your JavaScript. Super awesome stuff. And when you, let's say, click, there is a loop, so you can choose the element, and it's gonna make you rules. Okay, these are rules. The rules, those rules, then pixels. So you can see the size of your element. So it's 72 pixels to 22 pixels. It's margin left. It's position from left. It's not margin. Position from left is about 200 pixels and something. Position from top is 79 pixels. So you can use that. I usually use the eye. Looks good, doesn't look good. We're front-end developers. We have to decide. Okay? So the sweetest part here, why I wanted to write that code, is the header. Because if you remove that CSS, the header looks bad. Okay? So scroll the time. It's super awesome. No. Okay, I'm gonna remove it, I'm gonna save it, and you will see how bad it looks without CSS. Okay? No border, no shadow, nothing. Plain. Bleh. And with CSS, it becomes he compiled it from C++ or whatever language it was to JavaScript, and it works, and it's try to play it. That's how it's called.
אבל זה לא עובד חלק, אתה צריך...
זה עובד חלק, זאת הכוונה. זה עובד חלק.
אתה כותב ב-C ואתה מקבל, זה לא ישר, אתה יכול להריץ את זה.
לא, אתה מקבל קובץ JavaScript, אתה מעלה אותו, ואתה רץ. והוא עובד כאילו כמעט כמו נייטיב, אתה לא מרגיש את זה. זאת הכוונה הכי חשובה פה. שעכשיו אנשים יכולים להגיע עד נקודה שהם יכולים לעשות ביצועים של JavaScript. כל כך טובים שאתה כמעט לא מרגיש כלום. So let's talk about jQuery. The very basic jQuery and any work with jQuery starts with selectors. If you remember, we discussed them in CSS. So here's the same. Only jQuery has even more selectors. So if you want to know more, go to this URL. So basically, in order to start to work with the jQuery, you need to give it a selector. It will go to your HTML page, retrieve part of HTML that you're interested in, and on that part, you're going to perform some methods. You're going to call some methods of jQuery. That's it, very simple. So, for example, here's a small example. If I write dollar brackets hash list means give me whatever element. I have no clue what the element. With the ID list, it's going to give me an element. Okay, that's the meaning of this syntax. So JavaScript, jQuery has a bajillion amount of methods, just an insane amount. If it's impossible to remember all of them, I always have a documentation. I go and I see whether I chose them. Even if I know the method, there might be method which fits more, which I don't know, and I have to search it. I'm gonna go through very basic methods that does DOM manipulations, which we were supposed to use today. Method html without parameters is going to retrieve you HTML code of the selector that you asked. If you give a parameter here, the parameter usually HTML code or HTML string, which is going to parse by jQuery. It's going to remove from HTML from what it has, from the selector, and append your HTML. People who know, are you agree with me, right? See, that guy is very smiling. I'm thinking like, what, am I saying something stupid? No? Oh, right? No. Okay, good. Append is not going to remove your HTML, it's just going to append the HTML string which you give to the current code of HTML. Remove is going to remove the whole element, including the selector. If I'm not wrong. Yes, it's going to remove the whole element, including the selector. Empty, empty, is going to clean the content, leaving the selector. Attribute is it's also getter and setter. So if you pass just one parameter, my attribute, it's going to retrieve you the value of the selector, which has an attribute called myAttr. If you pass name of the attribute and the value, it's going to set the value of the attribute to HTML. Attribute, remove attr, CSS is a particular. Okay.
The attribute, if I use it as a getter and the selector retrieves several elements, then I get like an array or a list of the values.
I don't think that's going to retrieve you an array, because you ask a selector, okay, let's say you want to query a div. Its attributes inside the, not as the children inside the div. These are attributes which are written when you write a div, okay.
But the selector can retrieve several elements, right?
No, the selector retrieves, I see what the question is.
I think it queries by ID, no?
No,
ID
you
or
query
name?
it by, honestly, I don't know. I'm not gonna lie to you, I don't know. Need to check. So, CSS does some manipulations with style sheets. You specify the property and you give it a value. Add class and you give it a value. It adds a new class to the HTML element. Remove class the same. Text retrieves the value which are inside of a selector. For example, if I have A and inside of A I have some text, it's going to retrieve it. Val retrieves you the value of attribute named value. When you have input or HTML tags which are related to forms, they usually have attribute called value, and the value is not the same as the text inside of the input. So let's say inside of the input I can write input value equals 1, and as a text, I can write insert. Okay. Da, da, da. So if I'm gonna call text, it's gonna give me insert. If I'm gonna call val, it's gonna give me 1. That's about DOM manipulations. Adjects is also quite important thing. Who knows what Ajax is? That's it. Come on, people. Ajax is asynchronous HTTP requests to whatever place you say. Because of the browser implementation, the syntax which you have to write is also differs from browser to browser. That's why jQuery has an abstraction over Ajax. It's this is the most complex structure of Ajax request, which you can get in jQuery. There are more easier version of Ajax request. You specify URL which you want to query. You specify the type of HTTP request. It might be GET, it might be POST. If it's POST, you specify, even if it's GET, you can specify the data which you want to give to the server, and you specify 2 callbacks. Success is callback when you have a successful, when you get HTTP status 200. Error is all the other statuses. Everybody knows what callback, right? Callback? Everybody knows. I know that you know JavaScript already. Okay. Another important part of jQuery is jQuery events. DOM events is a very powerful thing. Why? Because it's browser basically issues the event. It's a browser? Yeah, I think it's a browser. It issues the event when something happens. When user made a click, when user made a double click, it's not going to tell you anything. Browser doesn't catch double clicks. So it has click the mouse in, mouse enter, mouse over, mouse leave, and some other events. So jQuery wrote an abstraction to those events so you can catch them and to do something. Let's say I do some dragging, okay, and I have some item which I drag, and here I have icon of my trash bin. And when I drag these, and when I enter the pointer, the mouse, to when I enter the trash icon, I want to change the background to darker, okay, to make it like over. So these the event. So browser is gonna fire for me an event mouse enter. When I'm gonna drag back, it's gonna fire me event mouse leave. So using those events, I can do whatever stuff I like. So jQuery creates abstraction over events. It's again selector and click, meaning do something when the selector which I told you is going to be clicked, and you provide as a parameter a function which is going to be called when the click happens. And the same approach. Here's a bunch of events: double click, mouse down, mouse up, mouse over, mouse enter, mouse leave, and 2 more like generic event. I can specify on any selector, I can specify method on and provide event name, okay, and specify the function. So instead of writing selector.click, I can write on click fire this function. Okay, that's all about jQuery. Now about guidelines. So again, how many people know what JavaScript is? Okay, who knows what global space in JavaScript is? Whoa, 2. That's it. Okay. Okay, I'll try to explain. So when you run in JavaScript, it has a global space. In browser, this global space is called window. It's a JavaScript object which is called window, where many stuff is saved there. The problem with the global space is that everybody has access to that. Every script which runs on the website has access to the global space. I write my scripts. I use 10, 12 other libraries. They also have access to the global space. They can put something there. I can put something there. I have no clue what they put there, and they have no clue what they put there. So we may have name collisions. So I can make such situation then when my code is not going to work. The problem in JavaScript, particularly, is that. When I write a JavaScript function, and inside the function I declare a variable var a fs. This variable is going to be declared inside the function. Okay? And that's cool. When the function is done, the variable dies because it sits inside the scope of the function. If I do like that and I don't declare the variable, it's going to leak to the global space automatically. Can you imagine you forget when you have a for each loop, for loop, you specify I, you specify the iterator, you forget to specify var, to write var, it's going to look to the global space, it's going to mess with somebody other for loop, and instead of I equals 0, which is the beginning of the array, you're going to get I equals, I don't know, 5,000. And that's it. And your for loop is not going to run. That's, in a very primitive explanation, what the global space is and what's the danger of the global space. So, don't populate the global space. How you can solve this problem? Make a namespaces. JavaScript is still a very primitive language. It's not as strong as Java or Python. It doesn't have modules, it doesn't have classes, it doesn't have namespaces. So in order to specify a namespace, you create one variable inside of the global space as an object, and you put all your stuff there. And you say, this is my space, don't touch it. Actually, no, you can't say don't touch it. But when people, like, for example, when I open the window and I see YUI, which is a global variable of YUI library, I know that that's their stuff. And what I also know that their stuff sits only in this object and nowhere else. If you open window and you see Jquery, so Jquery is going to be written like window hash $. This is the abbreviation of Jquery, and that's what you're going to see. It means that all the code which is relative to Jquery is going to sit there. Actually, it's not exactly true because Jquery has two global variables. One is $, and another one is Jquery. So you will see them both. But still, everything is going to be seen either here or here. What else? Global space. Another problem. Who learned from W3 schools? Okay. W3 schools is okay, not the best. Okay, they give you very, very, very minimum basic in order to understand something, but they don't give you good practices. The next guideline: write JavaScript only in JavaScript files. In W3 schools, you can see line like that. Who saw that? 1, 2, 3. Okay, good. You saw that. Don't write it. It's bad. Why? First of all, what's written here? I have a tag which is a with the class add, and I specify some JavaScript function on click event, and it does something, and then I close the a. Let's say I have a code base, the code base which I'm not familiar. I took it from more who learned from W3 schools, and I see that my code doesn't work. And I have a JavaScript exception. So where is the exception? I assume exception is somewhere in the Jquery, in JavaScript files. Okay. So if I use home dev tools, it might tell me where the exception is. If I don't know how to use home tools, so how I fix it? I go through JavaScript files. I try to figure out where that exception might pop up. I don't see, I have no clue what I do. I start deleting parts of the code of the JavaScript in order to eliminate the place where these mistake appears, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And what do you have at the end? If you have this stuff, you deleted all JavaScript code and you have a JavaScript exception. What the hell? Why? It doesn't make any sense. Actually, no, it does, because it's somewhere in HTML. And lasso debug. Do the debug of this stuff is hard. So don't write it. Instead of that, write it from the jQuery or from JavaScript. Write the selector nikuda add, which is the selector of a class. Register an event on click and give a function which you want to do. Do like that. And if you have an exception or you have an error, I know where to go, and your friends know where to go. Your colleagues will know where to go. They're not gonna curse you. Undebuggable. Okay, 2 small guidelines in order to finish. Exactly, I have 1 minute. Write small functions. Don't write big functions. They do some stuff, one function and everything goes there. Don't do that. It's impossible to debug. It's complex to debug. It's impossible to test. JavaScript, despite it's young, it has unit tests. Unit testing is good, particularly in JavaScript, because you don't compile JavaScript. You can't work it before you deploy your JavaScript code. Before you ship it, you can check only on your own browser whether it's work or not. If your application is complex, you can't check everything. So you start writing unit tests. Writing unit tests for functions like that, impossible. So writing unit tests only possible for the function which does one conceptual action. Okay? So everybody understands what conceptual action is, okay? So write one conceptual action per function. In that way, it's going to be more readable and more debuggable. Very good English. More debuggable and better tested. Captain Obvious. Write comments. Very smart dude from the world of JavaScript who used to work in Yahoo said, the best code is when I can take a look on the code and without going through the function, I can understand what it does. And what it does is written comments. It's gonna save you life because now I have to go through code which I wrote half a year ago. And you think that I do remember what it does? No. I have no clue what it does. I write comments. Otherwise I can't recall, and to go through code, because the code might be complex. And it's gonna take you, I don't know, 20 minutes to go through code, through all ifs, through all Ajax calls, because everything is asynchrony. It's gonna be tough to understand. So write comments, plus using, who's familiar with JDocs? JDocs? People? JDocs, okay. So there is, JDocs is automatically, which it is a tool for automatic generation documentation from JavaScript, from Java code, right? Okay. So there is a thing called JSDog, which does absolutely the same. It takes your JavaScript and it creates documentation out of that. It's going to save you time to write documentation later. When you go to work, or you already work, everybody hates writing documentation. When you study, we don't do that. When you come to work, eventually your boss will ask you to do that because somebody is going to inherit your code, and instead of understanding your code, they want to go through documentation. Okay, time to code. Not so much time to code, actually. Questions so far? Yes.
Is this presentation somewhere?
Yes, it's online. It's slideshare.net. I will post a link on a meetup.
It's on the front page. It's
yeah,
featured,
it's featured.
right?
Yes, today, I don't know, because I uploaded it yesterday. From yesterday, it had already more than 100 views.
400.
It's 4.
Yeah.
I left the work today. It was 180.
It's on
Today I got the mail from SlideShare that it got featured and posted on the front page of SlideShare. I thought it would be boring. People said otherwise. Okay.
You have one presentation with 50,000 views. I'm not sure if you're aware.
50? No, it's not
50,
50. It's
it's
5,000. It's
No,
close
it's
to
not
5,000.
5?
Yes, it's
But
close.
Lou, is that?
Is it already 5? It was 4
Oh,
something.
42 more views and you have
42 more views.
No,
Okay.
I think.
Yeah, but I posted like almost a year ago. So anyway, any more questions? No, that's it. So that's the end of the presentation.